በሚቀጥለው ሳምንት ከሄድንም በሚቀጥለው ሳምንት ወይ በሚቀጥለው ነው እንጂ ፋይናንሻሊ እኮ ብሮ
ታውቃለህ ራስህ ነው እንዳታም ስለሆነ ማሰብ ስለብር ታስብ ያለቀም የነገ ሲባል ምን ችግር አለ ታዲያ ነው
እኮ እኔም እኮ አስቤ አላውቅም እኔ ሀብታም ስለሆንኩ ነገራችን ላይ እሺ ትሪም ኢንሻአላህ ላርገውና እስኪ ደውት በጣም እሺ እና ጮክ ብላ አንብበ እያልከኝ ነው really እስኪ እናያለና እሺ requirement management እንደውም ላንተም ይሆናል በዛው ማለት ነው the process of managing changes to the requirements for a system okay management ላይ ገባው ነው shit sorry validation chapter 5 requirement validation analyze and validation requirement validation is a final stage of requirement engineering the aim of requirement validation is to validate the requirements analyze work with raw requirements as elicited from the system stakeholders. How we got the right requirements is a key question to answer at this stage. Validation works with a final draft of the requirements documents, example with negotiated and agreed requirements. Have we got the requirement right? Is the key question to be answered at this stage. Requirement validation inputs and outputs. So requirement validation inputs are requirement documents, organizational knowledge, organizational stages. So requirement validation outputs are list of problems and agreed actions. Validation inputs, requirement documents should be a complete version of the documents, not an unfinished draft format and organized according to organizational standards. Organizational knowledge of implicit of the organization which may be used to judge the realism of the requirements. And organizational standards. Local standards example for the organization of the requirements documentation. Validation outputs, problem list and agreed actions. List of the discovered problems in the requirements documents. Agreed actions are list of agreed action in response to the requirements problems. Some problems may have several corrective actions. Some problems may have no associated actions. So requirement reviews. A group of people read and analyze the requirements. We call it requirement review. Look for problems, meet and discuss the problems and agreed on actions to address the problems. So requirement review process are first plan a review, then distribute documents, then prepare for review, then hold review meetings. After that, follow up actions, then revise documents. So the principle. ቱዲ ምንድነው? ቱዲ ሞሽን ምንድነው?
ስሪዲ አልተማርንም ማለት
ስሪዲ አልተማርንም፣ ግን አይዲያሊ ነግሮናል። ላይክ የሚቀየረው ነገር ዴፕዝ ብቻ ነው ብሎ ሲነግረን ነበር።
ቱዲን አስተምሮን ስሪዲ ላይ ዴፕዙ ብቻ ነው የሚቀየረው ምናምን ብሎ ዝም ብሎ ነው ያለው።
The principal stage in the review process. 1. The principal stage. What are the stages of review process? So plan review. The review team is selected and a time and place for review meeting is chosen. Then second, distribute documents. The document is requirement document is distributed to the review team members. Number 3, prepare for review. Individual reviewers read the requirement to field to find conflicts, omissions, inconsistency, deviation, deviation from standard, and other problems.
የሁለተኛው ግሩፕ ላይ ማለት ነው።
Then stage
የመጀመሪያው
4
ግሩፕ ላይ ሳይሆን
of
ሶስት ስለሆነ ወንጌል
stage principle of
ሁለት ግሩፕ ነው
review
ያለው።
in this process is hold review
ሶስት
meeting.
ወንጌል ይላል።
Individual
ያንን አሳይን
commented
ያደረገው
and individual
ኤርትራን አሳይን
comments and
ያደረገው
problems
መጀመሪያ ያደረገው
are
እና
discussed
ሶስት ስለሆነ
and a set
ይሆናል
of
ሶስት ስለሆነ
actions to
ይሆናል
address the problem
እሱ ላይ
is agreed.
የስ ጉድ አይዲያ
And
ምናምን
5
የሚመች ከሆነ አንተ
follow-up
ያው ብዛት
actions.
ስለሆነ እየታየ ያለው
Follow-up actions. The chair of the review checked the agreed actions have been carried out. Then 6 review revise the documents, which means requirement documents is revised to reflect the agreed action. At this stage, it might be accepted or it might be re-reviewed. So problem actions, these are outputs. I think problem actions. What are problem actions? So requirement clarification. The requirement may be badly expressed or may have accidentally omitted information which has been collected during requirements elicitation. Misinformation. Some information is missed from the requirements documents. It is the responsibility of the requirements engineers who are revising the document to discover this information from system stakeholders. And the requirement conflict. Silent argo. Requirements conflicts. There is a significant conflict between requirements. The stakeholders involved must negotiate to resolve this conflict. So this is a problem then. An unrealistic requirements. The requirements does not appear to be implementable with the technology available today or given another constraint on the system. So stakeholders must be consulted to decide how to make the requirements more realistic. The other topic is pre-review checking. Reviews are expensive, but involved a number of people spending time reading and checking the requirements documents. So the expense can be reduced by using pre-review checking, where one person takes the document and looks for straightforward problems such as missing requirements, lack of conformance to standards, then or typography errors, etc. So documents may be returned for correction or the list of problems distributed to other reviewers. So pre-review checking process is the first requirements document will be available, then check the document. After that, check the document completeness and check document against standards. Run automate checkers, and after that, if we find a problem, then we should report it and recheck the document completeness and recheck the document against the standards. So review should involve a number of stakeholders drawn from different backgrounds. People from different backgrounds bring different skills and knowledge to the review. Stakeholders feel involved in the review process and develop an understanding of the needs of other stakeholders. So review team should always involve at least a domain expert and an end user. So review checklists are understandability, redundancy, completeness, and ambiguity. Are ambiguity, consistency, organization, conference to the standard, traceability are review checklist. So what is Understandability. So, can readers of the document understand what the requirements means? We have to check that. Redundancy. Is information necessarily represented in the requirement documents? Completeness. So, does the checker know of any missing requirements, or is there any information missing from individual requirements descriptions? This is a question. Ambiguity. When we check ambiguity, we have to find are the requirements expressed using terms which are clearly defined? Could readers from different backgrounds make a different interpretation of the requirement? We have to know that too. So constancy, due to descriptions of different requirements include contradictions. Include contradictions. Are there contradictions between individual requirements and overall system requirements? And organization. Is the document structured in a sensible way? Is it? Are the descriptions of requirements organized so the related requirements are grouped? This is question. Conform, Conformance to the standard. Does the requirements document and individual requirements conform the defined standards? Are they? So are uh, departure from the standards or justified? Traceability. Uh, are requirements ambiguously identified, including links to the related requirements and to reason why these requirements have been included? Traceability, we have to trace it. So there are checklist questions. In each requirement uniquely identified. Is each requirement uniquely identified? Are specialized terms defined in a glossary? Does a requirement stand on its own, or do you have to examine other requirements to understand what it means? And do individual requirements use a term consistently? Is the same service requested in different requirements? Are there any contradictions in these requirements? If a requirement makes reference to some other facilities, are these described elsewhere in the requirement or in the document itself? Are required are related requirements grouped together? If not, do they refer to each other or not? These are the checklist questions we have to ask. So problems. As we discussed earlier, there are a few problems. The first one is incompleteness, and the second is ambiguity, and the third is standards. So when incompetency, what in international copyright legislation is relevant to this type of requirements? What happens if copyright declaration is not signed? If a signature is a digital signature, how is will be signed? So these are basic problems, and other problems will be ambiguity. What does sign and electronic form means? Is this physically structured or digitally structured? Then standards. More than one requirement. Maintenance of copyright is one requirement. Issue of other documents in other. So prototyping. Prototypes for requirements validation demonstrate the requirement and help stakeholders discover problems. Validation prototypes should be complete, reasonably efficient, and robust. It should be possible to use them in the same way as the required systems. User documentation and training should be provided. So, prototyping from requirement validation. First, prototype treat testers and develop test scenarios. Then execute scenarios while document extend prototype system. Then document problems. So prototyping for requirement validation activities, choose prototype testers. The base testers are users who are fairly experienced and who are open-minded about the use of new systems. End users who do different jobs should be involved so that the difference of the system functionality will be covered. So develop test scenarios. Carefully plan is required to draw up a set of tester scenarios which provide broad coverage of the requirements. So end users shouldn't just play around with the system as they might never exercise critical system features. Okay, then execute scenarios. The users of the system work usually on their own to try the system by executing the planned scenarios. Then document problems. It's usually best to define some key of electronic or paper problems reports from which users fill in when they encounter a problem. And user manual development. Write a user manual from the requirements force a detailed requirement analysis and thus can reveal problems with the document information in the user manual. So it can include description of the functionality and how it's implemented, which part of the system have not been implemented yet, how to get out of the trouble, or how to install and get started with the system. This information should include in the user manuals. In model validation. Validation of the system model is essential part of the validation process. Objectives of model validation are needed. Objectives of model validation are first to demonstrate that each model is self-consistent. If there are several models of the system, to demonstrate that these are internally and externally consistent, and to demonstrate that the document or the model accurately reflect the real requirements of the stakeholders.
Kanuman የሆነ ሰዓት ይነሳል ሲና የሆነ ሰዓት ደግሞ ይቀዘቅዛል። ምናልባት አብዴት እያደረገ ስለሆነ ይህችን አብዴት እየሰራ እንዴ ይኸውልህ ደርሶ ደርሶ ኤረር ኮድ ያመጣል። የዜሮ ዜሮ ዜሮ ምናምን አብዴቱ
እና ምንድን ነው እሱ ችግሩ?
አላረኩም አብዴት
ሰርች አደረከው?
የሆነ ጊዜ ግን እንደዚህ አይነት ኤረር እያመጣብኝ በምን ነበር ፖስት ያደረግነው? ነውስ
በምንም ፎርማት ነው ያደረከው እኮ መጀመሪያ ቀን እኮ እንደሱ ያው መጀመሪያ እዛ መስፍን ጋር ሆነን የፎርማት ነው ቀን ማለት ነው።
ዊንዶ ነው ማለት ነው። ዊንዶ ልቀይረው ማለት ዲጌ ፎርማት
ኤስኤስዲ ነው ብለህ ነው ምንም አይሆንም ብለህ ነው። በአንድ ወር ውስጥ በጣም ብዙ ጊዜ ፎርማት ያደረከው እየመሰለኝ ቢያንስ።
አዎ
አሰቃየው። ምን ሆነብህ ነው እስኪ? ምን ሆነብህ? እንደዚህ የምፎረምተው 10 ጊዜ
ያኔ አንቲቫይረስን ከባክ ኢንተርኔት እንጂ ለመጠቀም እንግዲህ ፎርም ተከላሽ
በፈጣሪ አራጥና አሁን ብታጠና ይሻላል።
በስልክ ያጠናለሁ ፎርም ተከላሽ ችግር የለም።
ጀሰስ ሲጀመር ምን ሆኖ ነው አሁን በፎርምቱ አይደል እንዲቀደም
እኮስ ኢረር እያመጣ አብዴት አይጨርስም እና አብዴት
እና በራሱ ፍላሽ ነው ፎርምቱ ድጋሚ
አይደለም ለጭን እንደው
እሺ ሞዴል ለምን ሊነክስ አጭንበትም በቃ ይቅርብ ዊንዶው
ኤስሲሲውን ለወል ልክፈለው
ለምን
ሊነክስ ላደረገው
ትችላለህ ግን ሰብ ሲስተም ይሻላል ለጊዜው ወይ ቨርቹዋል ይችላል። ሰብ ሲስተም ጥሩ ነው እኔ የተጠቀምኩበት ወድጄዋለሁ።
ሰብ ሲስተም ማለት ዊንዶው ላይ መጫን ሊነክስ ምንም አዛረገው
ምንም በተለይ ባንተ ፒሲ ምንም አያደርገው በእኔ ላይ ራሱ በደንብ ይሰራል አይደለም ባንተ
ዊንዶውን አዛረግለው ዊንዶውን በመጠቀም በጊዜ ለፓይተን ነው የትኛው ነው የሚሻለው?
ሊነክስ ላይ ነው የምሰራው ፓይተን ኡቡንቱ ላይ ማለት
ኡቡንቱ ማለት እና እነኛው ሲከፍቱ ኡቡንቱና ዊንዶው የሚያስመርጡት እንዴት ነው
እኮ እሱ ዱዋል ቡት ነው ለሁለት ከፍለውት ማለት
ነው እኮ እንደዛ አደረገው ነው ማለት
ትችላለህ። ግን ዊንዶው ላይ መስራ ከሆነ እንትን ላይ መስራ ከሆነ ሁለቱ ላይ መስራ ከሆነ ሰብ ሲስተም ተጠቀም ነው ይሻላል።
ስለዚህ ሰብ ሲስተም ይሻላል።
አፕዴት ትራይ አድርገውና ካልተመቸ ኢንፎርማት ይችላል
ማጥፋት ነው ይላል ፎርም
ማጥፋት ይችላል።
ከዛ ዊንዶውን ኤስኤስዲውን ገና ካውንት ሰፕላይ እንትላል ነው ልከለው ነው
ሳትወጣ ስንት ጂቢ ነው? 500
400 ነው 300 ምናምን ለዊንዶው አይበቁም 300 ለዊንዶው አይበቁም 100 ምናምን ለሊነክስ
ሊነክስ 100 በጣም ይበዛበታል 50 ራሱ በቂ ነው። ሌላ ምጥነው ነገር ካለ ነው እንጂ እሱ ላይ ምን የሚጫን ነገር አለ? እስኪ እሱ ላይ ብቻውን ቢያንስ 3 ጂቢ በቃል ብቻውን ለመሮጥ ምንም ሲስተም ሳጭነበት ማለት ነው።
ሲስተም ሳጭነበት
አንድ 50 ጂቢ ራሱ ይበቃታል።
መቶ ዳርግለታል ማርጅ ማርክ ታለስ ሲሆን ግና በዚህ ባለበት
ወዴት
እሺ ዊንዶው ያለበት
መርጅ ማድረግ ትችላለህ ወይ?
እንትን ለምን ኤክስትራክት ማለት
አዋ
ምን ነበር አንተ
ትችላለህ። ዲስክ ማኔጅመንት ላይ ደግሞ
ማኔጅመንት ዲስክ ማኔጅመንት ነው ከዛ ዲስክ ማኔጅመንት ከዛ
ዲስክ ማኔጅመንት አልገባ
ወንዶስ ያለ ኤስኤስዲ አይደለም ይሄ ነው። ከዛ ኤክስትራ ኤክስፕሎር ሽሪንክ ልበለው
ሽሪንክ ነው ሽሪንክ ኤኒዌይስ አንተ ሪከርድ እያደረኩ ነበርኩ።
ከዛ አንድ ቴራ አንድ ጂ 100 ጂቢ ምንድነው 100 ጂቢ ስንት ነበር? በባይት ነው የሚመዘገው
100,000 ኪሎ ባይት መሰለኝ
በሜጋባይት ነው የሚጠይቅ
100
አንድ ጂቢ ስንት ሜጋባይት?
አንድ ጂቢ 1000
1004
እሺ 1004 ትላለህ። ምን ችግር አለው? እሷም ብታስተዋት ብትቀርስ
አይደለ?
እሺ then model validation validation of system model is an essential part of the validation process as we discussed as we repeated earlier. Objectives of model validation are to demonstrate that each model is consistent. If there are several models of the system to demonstrate that there are initially or internally or externally consistent, to demonstrate that the model accurately reflects the real requirements of system stakeholders. Objectives. These are the objectives. And some checks is possible with automated tools. So ምንድን ነው ይሄ የሚለው? read out loud preference ነው pre let's hear it.
ኤንቲኤፍ ነው የሚሆነው። ኤንቲኤፍኤስ ነው የሚሆነው። ፋይል ሲስተም
ምን አልከኝ?
ሲስተም ቫሊዴሽን ኤንቲኤፍኤስ ነው የሚሆነው።
አዋ
ስሙን
ኤንቲኤፍኤስ ለእንትን
ለኡቡንቱ
አይ ቀንሰው ግን አታርገው፣ አታርገው ይበቃል።
ችግር የለውም። ምንም እኮ አትጨምበትም ሲል ላይ ሌላ እኮ አለው አምስቱ ለምፈልገው ሲስተም።
እሺ ኤንቲኤፍኤስ አድርገው ግን ቡት ስታደርገው መፎርመት አይቀርም መልሰህ።
የትኛው
ያን ስጭ ነው ኤንቲኤፍኤስ እኮ ኡቡንቱ አይሰራም። ኤንቲኤፍኤስ ላይ መሰለኝ የሚሰራ አይመስለኝ፣ ሊሰራም ይችላል ግን እንትን ላይ ነው የራሱ ፎርማት አለው በብዛት የሚጠቀም። እስኪ ድሮፕ ዳውን ውስጥ እስኪ ምን አለ ሌላ?
የኤክስፓት
እንደዛ አይነት ፎር የኤክስፓት ፎር ምናምን ነገር ነው የሚጠቀም። ግን ኤንቲኤፍኤስ አድርገውና
በኋላ ስፎርመት ተመርጦ
ነው እንትን ይላል ራሱ
ይቀይራል። ኡቡንቱ እንደነበር ዩቢ
ቡን ኤንቲዩ
ዩቢ
ኡቡንቱ
ዩቢዩ ኤንቲዩ
ዩቢዩ እንቱዋ
ኤንቲዩ አይደለ?
ኤንቲዩ so prephrasing the model is an effective checking technique. Prephrasing techniques. Requirement testing. Each requirement should be testable. Example, it should be possible to define tests to check whether or not that requirement has been met. Investing requirement tests is an effective validation technique as missing or ambiguous information in the requirement description may make it difficult to formulate tests. So each fundamental requirement should have an associated tests. Okay, so this is requirement testing. Test case definitions. What usage scenarios might be used to check the requirements? These are test cases. So does the requirement on its own include enough information to allow a test to be defined? So is it possible to test the requirement using a single test, or are multiple test cases is required? Question. Test case. So could the requirement be restated to make the test case more obvious? Okay, these are test case definitions. And test record form. So the test record form, the requirement is identified. Related requirements, test descriptions, requirement problems. Okay, I like requirement problems, comments and recommendations. These are form of test records. So the requirement is identifier. There should be at least one for each requirement identifier. Related requirements. This should be referenced at the test may also be relevant to these requirements. And test descriptions. What are these descriptions? Are a brief description of the test and why this is an objective requirements test. It should include system inputs and corresponding outputs. Test descriptions. And requirements documentation, a documentation of problems which made his identification difficult or impossible. Requirements problems. So comments and recommendations is one of the record test record forms, and these are advice on how to solve requirements problem which have been discovered. So these are chapter 5 requirements validation process. Okay, then we should end this stream now while you are ቻልል አድርገውና ፊል ወዝወዘው የሀገሬን እስክስታ ኢንዱስትሪ ዩቲዩብ ላይ ላይቭ ስትሪም እያደረኩ ነበር እስካሁን ይገርማል።
ያነው ኦፍላይን ነው
ማራ ኦንላይን እስቲ እንግሊዝኛ እንግሊዝ